Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of July the 6th and 7th, 2024. Now, as far as my topic is concerned, I'm going to look at the United Kingdom. I'm not going to really look at anything else in the light of the fact there is a new government. Britain has a new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He was appointed somewhere between noon and 12:20 on Friday. I think that he arrived at Buckingham Palace at 12. I think he left Buckingham Palace around 12:20. So, yeah, somewhere between 12 and 12:20, Keir Starmer became British Prime Minister. The ascendant for him becoming Prime Minister will be very early Libra, and I want to look at a chart for the moment he became Prime Minister, the start of the Keir Starmer regime, or the Keir Starmer government, and just see what it tells us. And at the same time, I want to look at a few charts. I certainly want to look at Keir Starmer's chart again. I've already looked at his chart before. And I suppose I should have a brief look at Rishi Sunak. He's still leader of the opposition, but at least he was last time I looked, but I assume he'll be resigning at some stage as leader of the opposition. And then one has to consider his replacement. There are 3 or 4 replacements. Some possible replacements have lost their seats. Like, for example, there was a woman called Penny Mordaunt. I think she was a member of Parliament for Portsmouth, and she was seen as a potential front runner, and, well, not front runner, but certainly as a potential candidate, but she lost her seat. So she's out of the running. And so I'm just going to basically focus on a couple of people. I believe the favourite is Kemi Badenoch. I'll be having a look at her chart. So I don't have a time of birth for her. And, of course, I'll also be looking at the chart of Nigel Farage. I mean, why not? Great thing about Nigel Farage, compared with the other people I'm looking at, we have a time of birth. It makes things so much easier having a time of birth for Nigel Farage. But before I look at British politics, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend of July the 6th and 7th, 2024. So let's see what's going on. So as far as those pictures are concerned, there is Keir Starmer on the left, then there is Nigel Farage, there's Kemi Badenoch, and there is, of course, Rishi Sunak. So this chart for the weekend, I have set it for the middle of the weekend, when Saturday becomes Sunday, New York time. I mean, why not? And you can see that the moon is just edging into Leo. So London time, the moon moves into Leo at 4:56 a.m. on Sunday morning. So that means that if from the perspective of New York, it would happen 5 hours earlier. It would happen sort of 11:56 p.m. just as Saturday turns into Sunday. And if you're in Los Angeles or Portland, Oregon, then it's going to happen at 9 o'clock in the evening on Saturday. So it's a weekend where we've got kind of two halves. I think Saturday is by and large a moon in Cancer day. Sunday is more of a moon in Leo day. Even if you're Australia, you're going to get some moon in Leo at the end of the weekend. I don't know. I suppose, late on Sunday afternoon. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon will move into Leo. So it is a bit of a split weekend. So with the moon moving from Cancer to Leo, so moon in Cancer, obviously we're talking about something fairly emotional there. And, with the moon in Cancer, it's got a very much a new moon feel to it. So while the moon is in Cancer, many of us will feel that it is the beginning of something. It hasn't fully got itself together, but it has started. And I suppose you could say that from a perspective of Britain, it's a new beginning, because there's a new Prime Minister. He was appointed on a new moon. Is that fortunate? Is that unfortunate? My view, all things being equal, that it's not particularly fortunate, because he was appointed just before the new moon. But I'll leave British politics for later. In general, there is a real new moon feel to Saturday, that something is beginning. But it is also in Cancer. There is a sense of emotional power, maybe, certainly sensitivity, and a lot of us may be thinking about the past, and it's not what we say that matters, it's how we feel it. So we should really focus on our feelings, perhaps, but of course not get completely overwhelmed by these feelings. And with a new moon, it is a time of silence, where we don't have to say too much. We don't, for example, need to give away our plans. I mean, is that really important? Because it's just the beginning. Now, the moon does make other aspects. So on Saturday, just after the new moon, the moon makes a trine to Saturn, it makes a sextile to Mars, makes a conjunction to Venus, and makes a sextile to Uranus. And so there is the moon in Cancer making its trine to Saturn, and making a sextile to Mars, and sextile to Uranus, and of course it will actually make a trine to Neptune. So those trines and sextiles and the conjunction to Venus on Saturday, could be quite useful. They do, I think, tend to emphasize the emotional side of things. It's very nice, for example, to have moon conjunct Venus. Moon conjunct Venus is about relationships, perhaps, about togetherness and oneness, and being able to relate well to one another. Moon conjunct Venus. The moon is in its own sign, in Cancer, conjunct Venus. It's a time where we really can get on with people. But again, it's very important that we don't say too much. It's about being able to get on with people on an emotional level. So I think for many of us, actually, Saturday could be quite a good day, provided we put the emphasis on our emotions and on security and on comfort, and we are well aware of our boundaries. So turning to Sunday, the moon edging into Leo, and the first thing the moon does when it moves into Leo is, well, it does two things. As it moves into Leo, it will make an opposition to Pluto, and it will then make a conjunction to Mercury. So maybe with moon in Leo, as moon moves into Leo, things could become a little more complicated because of that opposition to Pluto. A sense of power, who's in control, especially on an emotional level. Yet the moon is moving into a fire sign, and there aren't any Well, there are actually Mercuries in Leo now. So now we're going to, with Moon moving into Leo, we've got 2 planets in fire signs. And that does give perhaps some extra excitement, and it also starts to emphasize intuition, because you can associate intuition with fire. That's being able to understand something without having to feel it, without having to think it. It just becomes clear in a flash. We don't have to spend ages and ages working it out. So if we've been struggling with something, trying to work out what it means, and we've tried to calculate it, we've tried to be logical, we've tried to be rational, but it just comes to us in a flash. It's obvious. And that is perhaps the advantage of Moon being in a fire sign. Though Moon in Leo does require attention, or at least likes to have attention, and if it doesn't get attention, it can feel a little bit sorry for itself. So if, as you move into Sunday, you find yourself wanting attention, it would certainly be nice if you get that attention, but don't feel that getting attention is obligatory. You may not get the attention you're looking for, and if you don't get it, it shouldn't matter. And anyway, the Moon moves through Leo. It makes a conjunction to Mercury, and it actually makes a sextile to Jupiter. That is pretty useful. I think you're going to feel it, particularly if you're in the Americas at the end of the day. But if you don't feel it, maybe it'll be more about early Monday. But it doesn't matter. The Moon is still making in a sextile kind of relationship to Jupiter and making a conjunction to Mercury. I mean, they're in the same sign, even if the aspect is not exact. When you've got Moon conjunct Mercury, it means that communications are relatively easy. As I often say, the Moon and Mercury are the communication planets. Mercury is the way we communicate perhaps with our brain, with our cognitive faculties, and the Moon is more about emotional communication. And so we can get our message across, especially once we've broken the ice of that opposition to Pluto. There may be something holding us back. We're afraid of what happens if we were to say what's on our mind. But when we actually start to get that message across, when the words start coming out, things will move quite quickly. Another aspect that we've got on Sunday is Venus semisquare Jupiter. So there is Jupiter and there is Venus, and you can see that Venus and Jupiter are 45 degrees apart. And this Venus-Jupiter semisquare, well, it's a bit of a mixed blessing. On the downside, you've got 2 benefics together, and when you've got 2 benefics together, you can get overindulgence. There's this dynamic 45-degree aspect, 1/8 of a circle at this aspect between Venus and Jupiter, and so they can be quite indulgent. There can be something excessive about it. Now, that could be something excessive about the way we express our feelings, or it could be something excessive about maybe how we spend our money. And so with Venus semisquare Jupiter, perhaps we have to be careful about over expenditure. But Venus and Jupiter are the benefics. So when you've got 2 fortunate aspects making a dynamic aspect like this, when you've got 2 fortunate planets making this dynamic aspect, good things can happen. We may be fortunate. There may be a certain sense of happiness. And both Venus and Jupiter are aspecting the Mercury node midpoint. So that is something, something I think that we really should, something that we really should be welcoming. So with the Mercury, with those two planets hitting the Mercury node midpoint, I think that is fortunate. So there is, by the way, there's the node, there's the North Node at 10 degrees Aries. There's Mercury at 7 degrees Libra. So you can work it out that the mean position between 10 and 7 is approximately 9. So you can see that Jupiter is occupying the Mercury node midpoint, and Venus is semisquare the Mercury node midpoint. So two planets aspecting the Mercury node midpoint. What is Mercury and the Mercury node pair about? I would have said the Mercury node pair is about communication, making contact with people. And I'm using the sort of German approach to the nodes there. The nodes from a sort of the Eberton or Witter schools does see the nodes about contacts. And so with Mercury and Jupiter hitting that, with Venus and Jupiter hitting the Mercury node midpoint, we can make lots of useful contacts. So it can actually be quite a sociable weekend, if we make the effort. Turning to the heliocentric position, so let's see if anything is going on. I'm not saying it is going on, but there's Mercury at 16 Libra in this weekend. So Mercury is making a square to Earth. There's the Earth square Mercury. Mercury is kind of making an opposition to Mars. In fact, it's making an opposition to Chiron as well. So with Mercury square Earth, we probably have got quite a lot to say. The Earth is our material environment. How do we respond to the Earth? Well, we've got things to say about it. And Mars is square Earth. Okay, the Earth is, of course, moving away from Mars, but there may be quite a lot of frenetic energy, mental energy, relating to the world around us. We've got things to say, and there are lots of comments, people commenting on what's happening with the world. People have got all sorts of opinions. Some of them might be useful opinions, but some of them might be just a waste of time. And Mercury making the opposition to Chiron, I would have said that opposition to Chiron, which is going to be more about Sunday, may move into Monday a bit, is about feeling that one has to make an impact. And I would see Chiron in this sense, not so much Chiron the wounded healer, as Chiron the maverick. People are going to be wanting to say things, perhaps to stir things up a little, to show how different they are. The inner maverick in us all wants to be heard. And so that can be useful, but we don't want to be different just for the sake of it. So that's the heliocentric position. We still have this T-square, really. We've got the opposition between Mercury and Mars, and arguably Chiron as well, and you've got the Earth on the T. So there's a bit of dynamism there, but I don't think it's a particularly big deal. So turning back to the geocentric position, I now want to give my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of July the 6th and 7th, 2024. Aries, you at the moment are starting to feel that you want things to happen, and you may feel that right now things could be better. And this process of feeling that things could be better could start with you yourself. You have this feeling that your own approach maybe needs to be improved upon. You've tried perhaps your hardest recently to make an impact, to make things happen, but deep down you don't quite feel that it's good enough. Things actually could be a lot better, and that may be motivating you. However, I don't think, Aries, you need to panic. You need to allow things to work themselves out at their own pace. And especially on Saturday, you maybe need time to think and feel and just enjoy your boundaries, your security, perhaps your domestic environment. Yeah, there are things that perhaps need to be done in your own home, and you don't really need to feel that there's anything wrong with the way you're going about things. Though I suppose I should point out that the moon is making a sextile to Mars on Saturday. So Mars is your ruler, and with that moon sextile Mars, there may be a sense, Aries, that you need to focus a little bit on money. I know that Aries doesn't like to spend too much time thinking about money, at least the typical Aries. It's somewhat beneath you, and it slows you down. But right now, Mars is in Taurus. Taurus is a slow sign for Mars to be in, and Taurus is also a material sign. And so spending some time on money, making sure that everything is in order and that you're not spending too much money, and perhaps looking for new ways to make money and save money, that would all be a good thing to be doing on a Saturday. However, as you move into Sunday, I think that things do change. It's at this stage where you start to realize that maybe things could be better, that you could be improving your approach and doing some work on yourself. There's no harm in that. There's no harm in having aspirations to do things better, but you don't want to beat yourself up about not being perfect. So do get the balance right. Also, we have the moon moving into Leo, and for an Aries, I think that is a big change. The moon moving into Leo is a fire sign, and it starts to make a conjunction to Mercury. And Aries, you're going to start to be yourself more. This time with all these planets in Cancer has been a bit difficult. You may, to an extent, Aries, have felt that you were grounded. Well, planets are now moving out of Cancer. Now only the Sun and Venus are in Cancer. Moon and Mercury are in Leo. They're in a fire sign. You are a fire sign. So you're getting some action here. And you're able to be yourself, and you can show everyone what you can do. And it's not just the fact that you can be creative, but you can also show the fun-loving side to yourself. And I think that people are going to really appreciate it. And you shouldn't hold back. And you don't have to take the world too seriously. In fact, with Moon in Leo, ideally there should be a lightness there, and you should have a certain sense of humour and spark. And I think you can, in fact, brighten up your world on Sunday. So that's the weekend. Overall, doesn't look too bad, and I would have said probably that Sunday is going to be a better day than Saturday. Taurus. Possibly the main aspect this weekend is a semisquare between Venus and Jupiter. Now, Venus is your ruler. It's semisquare Jupiter. So this semisquare between Venus and Jupiter might encourage you to be overindulgent. I think that this semisquare is probably stronger on Sunday than on Saturday, but I would have said that you should consider this aspect as being operational all weekend long. And there may be a tendency to overdo things, perhaps to be too focused on what you enjoy and what feels good, and in the process there's some danger that you could spend too much money. So do be careful if you're, planning visits to restaurants, other forms of entertainment, or if you're going crazy on online shopping, just buying stuff because it looks good, because you feel you need to spend money. Maybe there are pressures to spend money. Other people expect you to spend money. And you need to have some awareness here that once you start spending money, it may actually be difficult to stop. Also, if you feel that you need luxury, that you need your sensuality needs to be answered, your senses, good food, music, whatever, does it really need to cost you anything? I think that you can indulge yourself this weekend without necessarily having to spend a fortune. And it's not just about expenditure, it just might be overdoing it. Drinking, eating, spending too much time with other people to the extent where you just realize afterwards that you wasted a load of time. So a little bit of discipline might be in order, though I don't want to be too puritanical. I think that this Venus semisquare Jupiter can allow you to really enjoy yourself in a very natural way, and you can see pleasure in things which, on the surface might seem a little boring and commonplace, but pleasure is always there to be there. It's just round the corner. So it is a weekend for enjoying yourself, but just make sure that you don't overdo it in the process of enjoying yourself. And, when I was giving my sort of introduction, looking at the general astrological picture, I pointed out that both Venus and Jupiter were on the Mercury node midpoint. So Venus, your ruler, aspecting the Mercury node midpoint. This does mean that you can interact with the world at large. New contacts, new people to meet, new people to have fun with. So it's probably not a good idea to be spending the whole weekend alone, though do respect your own boundaries. And I think this is especially the case as you move into Sunday, as the moon moves into Leo, the moon starts making an opposition of Pluto. I think that it's a time when grounding is going to be important to you, and the moon is going to be opposition Pluto, and so moon in Leo opposition Pluto in Aquarius. That's about you trying to find real security, but at the same time feeling pressurized to do something else, being pressurized to move beyond your boundaries. And that would especially be the case if you happen to be working or doing anything business related on Sunday. But if not, then it's that pressure is not going to be quite so bad. But in general, I think it's going to be a pretty good weekend. And I shouldn't forget that on Saturday, the moon makes a conjunction to Venus in late Cancer. So that's a really nice conjunction. And Okay, it's possible that moon conjunct Venus may feed into that Venus semi-square Jupiter and just create overindulgence. But it's also possible that that moon conjunct Venus, that you can just enjoy the moment, be yourself, be with reassuring people, and also just feel comfortable and grounded. So that further supports the idea that it can be quite a good weekend for you. Gemini, it's possibly a weekend of two halves. On Saturday, you're perhaps going to feel that there are maybe things that need to be done, or that things need to be clearer. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you probably would say that you maybe don't have enough information, and you don't have enough information to make commitments. I mean, you can't give people blank checks. And I think you know that you can't give people blank checks. I'm not just talking about money, but you have to know what's involved. And I think that on Saturday, you really can start to understand what is involved. And you certainly shouldn't take what people say at face value. And you might want to give careful consideration to what things cost. I mean, it needn't be so difficult. I mean, the moon in Cancer making a trine to Saturn, that's quite a materialistic trine, at least from a Gemini view. And so Gemini, you can organize things. You can make sure that you absolutely understand what the financial commitment actually is, if there is any financial commitment. So do try to find out what the cost of everything is. I do think that it really matters, but we don't want to get too caught up on financial and material issues. And I do think it's a time when you do need to consider the social and interpersonal dimension. And that is because Mercury is making a semisquare to the Venus-Mars midpoint. So the Venus-Mars midpoint, there is... Mars is at approximately 20 Taurus. Venus is at 24 Cancer. So the midpoint, the Venus-Mars midpoint is 22 Gemini, and Mercury at 7 Leo is going to be making a 45-degree aspect to the Venus-Mars midpoint. And the Venus-Mars midpoint is about attraction, and it's about charisma. And Mercury is not just your ruler, it's also the planet of communication. So the whole way in which you communicate can be really very fortunate, and people are going to listen to you. And even if you haven't got your facts entirely right, people are going to want to hear what you have to say. And the way you put your words together, Gemini, will be very seductive. I think all weekend long. So it would be a shame if you don't say anything this weekend. It would be a shame if you kept yourself to yourself, because I think you'd be missing an opportunity. So perhaps, Gemini, you should be considering who you want to meet over the weekend, and perhaps also, what do you want? So if you want something and you have a chance to interact with someone who can provide you with what you want, then, Gemini, I think that through your clever words, you can actually make things happen. And as the weekend progresses, the moon moves towards the end of Cancer, and then it moves into Leo. And so when the moon moves into Leo, it starts making a conjunction to Mercury. And that helps you even more. Moon conjunct Mercury is really very communicative. It can communicate with power. And because the moon conjunct Mercury is taking place in a fire sign in Leo, it makes you an exciting person. And I think you might be able to benefit actually from the moon being opposition Pluto. And it goes back to what I was saying with Mercury aspecting a Venus-Mars midpoint. It makes you compelling. There's something about you that people find to be interesting, exciting. And yes, you can be seductive. So I think, Gemini, it could be actually quite a powerful weekend when you can get what you want and you can get people onto your side. So try to make the most of it. Cancer. We've just had a new moon in your sign. And with this new moon, Cancer, it's by and large, I would have said, pretty fortunate. It does represent a new beginning for you, when you can really start to get things moving. And I think that you'll be helped by just the general way in which you're able to present yourself. I mean, if we look at what's happening on Saturday, the moon, while it's moving through Cancer, makes some great aspects. It makes a trine to Saturn, it makes a sextile to Mars, makes a conjunction to Venus, sextile to Uranus. That really allows you to make things happen. When that new moon started, there may have been a bit of uncertainty. That's because the moon was getting really very close to the sun, and you might have felt yourself to be, just a little bit burnt out, too close to the sun, not really wanting to take risks. But the new moon happens, and then the moon starts moving away from the sun, and that's when it starts picking up these fortunate aspects with Saturn, Mars, Venus, Uranus, and it's just a time when you're very able to make things happen. And I think that your social skills should be good because, moon trine Saturn, the moon is ruler of your sign, and Saturn is ruler of Capricorn, which is your opposite sign. So with that moon trine Saturn, that should really help in terms of getting on with other people. And additionally, the moon is making a conjunction to Venus, the relationship planet. So I think that on Saturday, your social skills are going to be really good. You're going to come over as a trustworthy person, and at the same time you'll know who to trust. That is moon trine Saturn, and so perhaps you might get evidence that there actually is one person out there who you really can trust. Again, that goes back to moon trine Saturn, and you should perhaps be considering some of the relationships you're in. So if you're involved with someone, whatever level, and you've had your doubts, that moon trine Saturn might be a real confidence builder. Then on Sunday, the moon leaves Cancer and moves into Leo. Now you might think, Oh, well, that's not so good because the moon is out of your sign. The moon is no longer in the sign of its rulership, because moon obviously rules Cancer and it's now in Leo. But I actually think it's quite a good thing, because the moon is getting some distance from the sun. And on Sunday, you're starting to get some objectivity. It's not all about your feelings. You can start to see people and things out there for what they are without getting too emotionally involved with it. And the moon is going to be making a sextile to Jupiter, and it's going to be making a conjunction to Mercury. So that should really help you. It should give you a great sense of what things are, what needs to be done, and I think you'll have a sense of purpose, but also a sense of realism. And that might apply to money, what things cost, how much money you've got, how much money you need, and what steps you need to take to achieve your material goals. So really, Cancer, I don't think that there's anything really to be concerned about this weekend. So enjoy yourself and make the most of it. Leo, the moon starts a weekend in Cancer, ends a weekend in Leo. So Sunday, we see the moon entering your sign. And I think that is going to be a big relief. When the moon has been in Cancer, particularly when you've got the sun in Cancer as well, you've had this new moon in Cancer, you might have felt that, it just wasn't the right time. You felt perhaps that you just wanted to hold back. And that might have applied, if you're an American Cancerian, with all the sort of Independence Day celebrations, if you were trying to enjoy yourself on Independence Day, it might not have been entirely easy, because it didn't feel the right time. But with the moon moving into your sign on Sunday, I think that you're going to feel that you've arrived, that you're going to have a great sense of who you are and what you want to achieve and how you want to express yourself. And you're going to be helped by the fact that the moon is going to be conjunct Mercury and it's going to be sextile Jupiter. Okay, those aspects may not be exact, but there is that Mercury-Jupiter feel to Sunday, especially late on Sunday. And you're going to feel that you can really tell the world who you are and what you want. I mean, that doesn't mean to say, though, that Saturday is going to be a difficult day. I think that on Saturday, it may be a time when you feel that you need to do a little bit of preparation, but you're still going to have quite a lot of energy. You're going to have a great sense of, how much energy you have, where you want to put that energy, and it's just going to get stronger and stronger as you move through the weekend. And then, yes, as you move into Sunday, you'll be able to apply this energy to something really constructive. But try not to be too obsessed about yourself. Don't feel that you need to get loads of appreciation. Now, that is possible, but some Leos will have a desire for attention, with the moon and Mercury in Leo. Now, it's possible that you do get that attention. I think if you're with other people, they will appreciate you. But people show their appreciation in many different ways. And just because someone doesn't say anything, just because someone doesn't lavish praise upon you, doesn't mean that they don't think you're wonderful. So don't get too caught up with surface appearances and what people say and what people don't say. People have their own ways of showing appreciation. And I do think that you need to respect that. But still, I think that as you move through Sunday, you're going to have more and more to say, and I think that you will have a certain amount of luck, and I think that friends and others, they are going to be there for you, and they're going to actually help you to express yourself. But just don't have too many expectations. Don't expect them to tell you that you're wonderful. They probably think you're wonderful anyway, but you don't have to always be told how wonderful you are. And I suppose that's the lesson of being a Leo. Virgo, you are quite appealing this weekend. It doesn't matter what you're doing or what you're not doing, Virgo. I do think that people are going to notice you, and that you're going to have a certain amount of charisma and attractiveness that will just be quite obvious. But you don't have to make too much of an effort here. I mean, you're a Virgo, right? You're quite sensible and you're down to earth, and you're not known for being particularly showy. So yeah, you can be attractive and you can get people's attention without having to make any special effort. It's just about being yourself. And in fact, subtlety might actually be quite important. If someone tries too hard to be attractive and charismatic and to stand out, it can somehow seem a little bit fake, and the effort might just fall flat. But if you just yourself, just be yourself, don't feel that you have to say anything or do anything, then people will just naturally gravitate towards you, and they will start to appreciate you. And you're helped by the fact that Mercury is moving towards a sextile to Jupiter. Now, this sextile between Mercury and Jupiter is not exact this weekend. I think it's exact probably Monday, but it's still forming. You can still feel that sextile between Mercury and Jupiter, and that Mercury sextile Jupiter does actually make you quite fortunate. Luck is on your side, but it probably doesn't feel like it. You can't really see luck moving your way, but it is happening behind the scenes. So don't worry. The universe has got everything under control, and I really do think that things are going your way. Now, as far as the specifics of a weekend are concerned, we do have the moon going through two different signs. The weekend starts with the moon in Cancer, ends with the moon in Leo. So Saturday is probably the time for doing any socializing. So if you've got social activities, people you want to meet, probably best to focus on the Saturday. If you try to be heavily sociable on Sunday, it might not work. You might just not quite be yourself. And this is especially the case if you're with people you don't really know. You might just feel that there's too much attention. But if you're in a setting that you feel entirely comfortable with, then I think it's a different matter, because on Sunday we've got, the moon is in Leo, it's moving to a conjunction of Mercury, so you're going to be able to talk about the things you want to talk about, and if you trust the person that you're talking with, then things are going to run very smoothly. Though you don't always have to be with people. Moon conjunct Mercury could be about your own ideas and what you are trying to achieve in your own way. And that's especially the case if you're involved in something that is a little bit secretive, where you don't want people to know what you're doing. I think that you'll be actually quite good at hiding your plans and intentions. And when everything is hidden and when you are undisturbed, I think, Virgo, you can achieve some very useful things, and you'll be helped by the fact that the moon is opposition Pluto. So Mercury recently made an opposition to Pluto, and okay, Mercury is moving away from that opposition, but the moon kind of brings it back into line. Moon makes an opposition to Pluto, then it makes a conjunction to Mercury. So with the moon in that, making those two aspects, that could be quite intense. And so on Sunday, you may be able to really focus on something like never before and really understand what's going on. And once you've made the links, once you've made the connections, once it's all clear, once you've gone beyond all the little details and you've seen the big picture, I think you're going to feel really very optimistic. And that's when when Mercury sextile Jupiter starts to make its presence felt. And as you move into the new week, as you move into Monday, Tuesday, I think that things will really start moving your way. Libra, I think things are looking pretty good for you at the moment. Things are happening, and I think that you're able to benefit from, many of the things astrologically that are going on right now. So we have just had a new moon. So I talked about that new moon when I was considering what was going on for you on Friday, and I do think that new moon was fortunate, and I think that you're going to continue to feel the good fortune of this new moon. The new moon, I think for you, does to an extent represent a bit of a new beginning in terms of some of your ambitions and the things you want to achieve. There seems to be little doubt that you can achieve quite a lot, and just right now that you have a very clear idea about what is possible. Now, you might feel that right now you can't fully articulate that idea. Maybe it's just because it's a weekend, but I think that by Sunday, as the new moon starts to break up a little, when the moon moves into Leo, the sign following the sun, then you're going to get a certain sense of objectivity, and you're going to have a better idea about what actually can be achieved in the real world. And starting off with Saturday, so on Saturday there are really some very useful things you can do. Now, possibly the most pleasant aspect is a conjunction between the moon and Venus. So you're going to have the moon in Cancer, the sign of its rulership, conjunct Venus, which is your ruler in this high-profile sector of your chart, Cancer. And that Moon-Venus conjunction means that you can really project yourself extremely well. Whatever you're doing, people are going to really notice you. Of course, it would help if you were in a high-profile environment. For example, if you were working, or you're just surrounded by people, and perhaps if you had a position of authority, or you were aspiring to a position of authority, that moon conjunct Venus is fairly effortless and really does enable you to make a very good impression. And at the same time, you do have a fundamental sense of optimism this weekend. And that is because there is a semisquare between Venus and Jupiter. So Venus is your ruler. It's 45 degrees from Jupiter. And this semisquare is dynamic, and it just makes you realize that things can go your way. There's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot to be enthusiastic about. And it may also have a social dimension, because this Venus semisquare Jupiter is aspecting the Mercury node midpoint. In other words, Venus is semisquare the Mercury node midpoint, Jupiter is conjunct the Mercury node midpoint, and the Mercury node midpoint is all about contacts. And so this weekend, there are just lots of people to meet, talk to. If it's all about the internet, social media, interacting with people over the internet, you can really expand your circle of contacts and friends this weekend. So really, do make the most of it. The only downside to Venus semisquare Jupiter might be a certain tendency to be a little over-indulgent, just taking things too far. You get into something, it's enjoyable, it's fun, you carry on with it, and you carry on with it, and it just becomes too much of a good thing. So I would suggest be a little bit careful if you are eating or drinking or spending money. I mean, spending money can be fun up to a point, but once you start spending money, it may be difficult to stop. So perhaps the beginning of a weekend, you should ask yourself how much you want to spend. And if you suddenly get a temptation to spend money over the weekend, which wasn't planned for, and it's dealing with something which is unnecessary, then hold back. So a little bit of financial discipline could be very useful. Now, on Sunday, the moon starts moving out of Cancer into Leo. And I think that with the moon moving into Leo, you still feel pretty good. Maybe you're not quite so focused on sheer ambition and power and status. It's perhaps more about being with people. People are going to be important. Communicating again is going to be more important. And I suppose it's going to matter that you are taken seriously. And when I say seriously, I mean it's your goals for the future have to be taken seriously. It's not just about achieving something in the short term. It's about doing something that really matters, is an essential part of who you are. And if you want to be taken seriously, the first thing that needs to happen is that you need to take yourself seriously. It's not about just responding to other people's expectations. It's about owning something. It's about owning your ambitions for the future. And so, Libra, what you want is not just about what other people want. It's not what authority figures want, or employers or family want. It's about what you want, and it's about your particular vision for the future. And I think that on Sunday, this is something that you can really start articulating to yourself. And once you get an idea of the big picture about your hopes for the future, what you desire for yourself, then you're going to be able to really put yourself in a good position to, create a path for yourself. I think that's what you have to do. And when you're creating a path for yourself, don't be too short term about it. think about where you want to go, I don't know, between now and maybe a year's time, maybe even longer. But just don't get totally caught up by short-term objectives. You need a bit of a long-term perspective there, and I think that's going to become very relevant as the moon moves from Cancer to Leo. Scorpio. There is quite a lot going on this weekend in a way. You feel that things are happening, and you might actually feel that there is a certain amount of pressure. And I think that pressure is not actually coming from the outside world. I think it's coming from you. You actually have pretty high standards, and you're just not satisfied with the way things are, and you're not satisfied perhaps with what you're doing and how far you have got. And so you may feel that it's a time to really do quite a lot of work on yourself. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have done anything wrong, or that you haven't been hardworking, that you haven't been focused. I'm talking more about your perceptions and perhaps your perfectionism. Things are just never quite good enough. And that can be a good thing. If we have high expectations of ourselves, then, that can really push us. But obviously, if we take things too far, we can sort of beat ourselves up about perhaps not working hard enough in the past or something like that. We have to think about the present. You have to think about the present and what you can do right now. And it does seem, Scorpio, that you can really put a lot of energy into making things better for yourself. So if you see some area in which you feel yourself maybe to be deficient, perhaps you don't feel you have sufficient knowledge or practice or understanding, you're going to want to fill the gap. And Scorpio, I think you're going to be able to fill the gap very effectively. As far as the specifics of the weekend is concerned, we do have this changeover. The moon starts the weekend in Cancer, then it moves into Leo. So with the moon in Cancer on sort of Saturday, I think this is perhaps a day to be more relaxed, not to be totally obsessed about what you're achieving, what you're not achieving, what you're achieving, what you're not achieving. You can't expect yourself to do everything all at once. And then on Sunday, as the moon moves into Leo, maybe to an extent the pressure starts. That's when you're going to be thinking really, what you can do, what you're not doing. And because Leo is an important sign for Scorpios. It's it's at the top of the chart. It's a very ambition-orientated sign from a Scorpio view. Mercury is already in Scorpio, and so with Mercury in Scorpio, you have been thinking perhaps quite a lot about what you want and what your ambitions are. So you throw the moon into Leo as well. So you've got a Moon-Mercury conjunction in Leo forming, and then things really start to happen. It's not just that you can articulate what you want to yourself, but I think that you're going to be able to articulate what you want and your ambitions, but you can start to articulate it to the outside world. And I do think that people really are going to listen to you. So take the opportunity to make your presence felt on Sunday, and the moon will continue moving through Leo as you move into the new week, as you move into Monday. I don't know when your week starts. Some people think Sunday, the week starts on Sunday. Other people think it starts on Monday. But, Sunday and Monday overall is a time when you can really project yourself, and I think project yourself very effectively. In terms of other people could be a bit of a problem, especially if you don't make a sufficient effort to understand them. There may be a sense in which people are behaving in a way that you regard as being sloppy and ill-disciplined. You have your ideas about the way things should be done, and focus is going to be important. And it just might seem that some people just don't share your focus, and they're letting things slip. They may be being lazy. They're just going in the wrong direction, and that might bother you. But maybe you should try to understand what's going on. Some people have big ideas. They want things to happen. They want excitement. They want happiness. They want pleasure. And perhaps you need to just understand what makes them tick. Now, it may be that they are just being overindulgent and irresponsible and lazy, and in which case you need to act accordingly. I suppose it depends on the situation, but maybe they just need a little bit of focus. And consider the possibility that you can actually help someone else focus their energy. Someone who starts off as being all over the place, with a bit of help from you, they can perhaps get themselves together. So, Scorpio, a little bit of tolerance this weekend might go a long way. Sagittarius. The moon eventually gets to Leo. The moon moves through Leo on Sunday. But on Saturday, the moon is in Cancer. And, with the moon in Cancer, it's perhaps not great, because it just might feel it's just more of the same. You expected Saturday to perhaps be a better day than Friday, and on the surface, things might feel a little bit disappointing on Saturday. Things are maybe more complicated than you'd realized. Things were a little complicated on Friday, but they're still complicated. At least that's how it seems on the surface. Though if you actually engage with what's happening, then I think the picture will rapidly improve. It's like you've got something knotted. You've got this string that's, it's full of knots, and you couldn't untie it on Friday, and you're just presented with the same mass of knots on Saturday, and it just seems to be the same. But actually, if you take a look at it again on Saturday, so perhaps you've got something that's been bothering you, you're not sorting it out, but on Saturday you give it another go, and actually the knots will start to loosen. And these knots may perhaps relate to other people. On Saturday, we've got a conjunction between Moon and Venus, and the new moon is breaking up. So the new moon could have been a bit difficult. It's just too intense. But as the moon moves away from the sun, makes a conjunction to Venus, things do become easier, and other people become more amenable. It's easier to communicate with them. It's not dead easy to communicate with them, but there's always a way to get your message across. And if there have been social complications, I think that with a bit of effort, then on Saturday you can start to resolve them. And as you start to resolve them, I think that you will get a growing sense of optimism, and that's caused by a semisquare between Venus and Jupiter. I mean, arguably, this semisquare between Venus and Jupiter is the main aspect this weekend. It's a powerful, dynamic aspect, semisquare, 45 degree aspect, 1/8 of a circle. It's half a square. The square aspect is 90 degrees, semisquare is 45 degrees. So with this Venus-Jupiter semisquare, you are able to really engage. At first it's hard work, but soon enough you are able to make your presence felt. And in fact, Sagittarius, you have the option or the possibility to make people's lives better. So if people seem a little bit down in the dumps, or they regard life as being overcomplicated, you can come in and brighten things up for them. Okay, there may be a little bit of resistance to begin with, but soon enough you're going to make your presence felt. And that's especially the case as you move into Sunday, because what happens on Sunday is that the moon moves out of Cancer and it moves into Leo. Leo is a fire sign. Leo is all about new possibilities. Things can really happen for you, and you can see the world in a new and optimistic light, and I think you can share your vision, and this is going to be, widely appreciated, I think. So, do make the most of it. And with the moon making a conjunction to Mercury, this is a time when you can find ways of relating to people in a way that is comfortable. In the past, perhaps recent past, as I've been suggesting, things have been a bit overcomplicated in terms of relationships, unnecessarily complicated, but those complications starting to ease on Saturday, but then on Sunday I think they ease, they get even easier. And perhaps it's all about, Sagittarius, just sharing some kind of a common vision and being able to talk about this common vision, and perhaps you and other people are going to find that there's stuff to be optimistic about. I know that I'm often negative in these videos, but I'd say I'm not being negative, I'm being realistic. But Sagittarius, you do need to be optimistic. You are an optimistic sign, and I think that come Sunday, there's going to be plenty to be optimistic about, and I think you should focus on what can go right rather than what can go wrong. Capricorn. Saturday, it looks like being quite an easy day. The moon is making a trine aspect to Saturn, so you've got the moon in Cancer. It's making a trine to Saturn. It's also making a conjunction to Venus, and I think that today, over the weekend, but particularly on Saturday, things really are starting to move. Things might have felt a bit stuck recently, and you've just had this new moon. The new moon was sort of Friday, perhaps early on Sunday, depending on your time zone. But that new moon may have made things feel a little bit complicated, but that new moon is starting to break up. The moon is moving away from the sun. It's making a trine to Saturn. It's making a conjunction to Venus, and you have a chance to really relax and to relate to other people. Just relate. You don't have to make a big effort to assert yourself or to, make it, to really force people to listen to you. If you don't want to, you can just be yourself. And Saturday can actually be quite relaxing. Though, I suppose if you want to assert yourself, if you feel it's really important and you want to get people to listen to you and accept whatever you want to accept what you say, if you want to push an agenda, yeah, you can do it if you want. It's up to you. I suspect that in most cases that's something you're not going to want to do. But if you're the kind of Capricorn that likes power trips, or perhaps it's part of what you do, maybe you feel it's important to have an influence on people. If you're a professional manipulator, or maybe there was someone locally who was getting signatures. What was it about? In support of natural gas, and they were in the town centre trying to get signatures. That seems like a nice thing to do, because natural gas helps people who are on perhaps on low incomes. Of course, natural gas is actually a dreadful stuff. I've just realised that. Did you know that natural gas increases childhood asthma rates by 40%? I was completely stunned when I found this out. And of course, natural gas also contains benzene, and natural gas is carcinogenic. But anyway, these people were collecting signatures, and then it turned out that they were being paid $5 a signature. So if you're that kind of person and you're collecting signatures, you think it's not bad money, is it? I mean, if you can get 100 signatures in a day, that's $500. If you're that kind of person. So that's what I mean by your ability to manipulate people. If it's important for you to manipulate your people, so if you're going to be spending Saturday collecting signatures and you're getting paid $5 a signature, you can make good money. Or if you are a salesperson trying to push a product, then for sure you're going to be in a great position and you can be very successful. But I suspect that most Capricorns are not going to want to go down that road. They're going to perhaps feel that such activities are beneath them. So you don't have to get involved in that kind of manipulation. And in that case, you can just relax, as I was saying before I got distracted. Now, Sunday is possibly a more complicated day than Saturday, because the moon does move into Leo, and it means that things are not going to be quite so easy, quite so transparent. So you might have to spend some time, working things out, and some deep thought might be required. And the moon does actually make a conjunction to Mercury. And with that conjunction to Mercury, it also makes a sextile to Jupiter. It means that relationships are probably going to be more intense, more difficult to begin with. But if you make the effort to understand people and try to move onto their wavelength without, of course, compromising anything, I think it will be an effort which is really worthwhile. And you just have to be more serious. But you are serious. Capricorn is a serious sign, and so on Sunday, if you can really focus on the things that need to be focused on, and if you can really start to engage other people with important issues, then I think, Capricorn, you'll be able to cover a fair amount of ground. Aquarius. The moon is changing sign. It's moving from Cancer to Leo. So on Saturday, the moon is by and large in Cancer. On Sunday, it's starting to move into Leo. And so that is a bit of a change for you. That is a bit of a change over. So perhaps on Saturday, you may feel that there are things that need to be finished off. They're almost finished, almost done, but there's still a little bit of work to be done. Not a great deal of work. And I think that you should be in a position to get cooperation, to get a lot of cooperation from other people, because the moon is making a trine to Saturn, and the moon is making a conjunction to Venus. So, Saturn is your ruler, and Venus, you could say, represents other people. And so the moon making a trine to Saturn, making a conjunction to Venus, creates good linkages between you and others, even if you're not really in the mood to engage with people. I think you can, and it can all be very useful. It doesn't have to be particularly emotional, even though the moon is in Cancer. It can be, people can focus on particular goals, particular projects, and it certainly helps if there is emotional harmony, if everyone's on the right wavelength emotionally, but it's not perhaps essential. So overall, Saturday, there is a high level of cooperation and also responsibility. I think that Saturday is a day when I get the impression that there is going to be a certain amount of mutual respect and also mutual obligation. That is really important. So it's not just about you having to do something on your own, you having the obligation. It's about other people feeling that obligation as well. And so if everyone feels obliged, then that creates a possibility of, of real cooperation. Then the moon moves into Leo. That movement does depend to an extent on your time zone. If you're in London, Europe, that's sort of early morning, 5 or 6 in the morning. Moon moves into Leo. Okay, it could be late afternoon. Sorry, when I say 5 or 6 in the morning, I'm talking about Sunday morning. Of course, the moon moves into Leo quite much later if you're in Australia or New Zealand. That might be late afternoon. But with the moon moving into Leo, Aquarius, this is a time when other people do matter, and as the moon moves into Leo, it starts making, it firstly makes an opposition to Pluto, and then it makes a conjunction to Mercury. And I suppose we need to talk a bit about that moon opposition Pluto, which is across the main axis of your chart. And this moon opposition Pluto, it may put the emphasis on power, which wasn't really happening on Saturday. So moon opposition Pluto could indicate some kind of power struggle, or a perception that there is a power struggle. You have got Pluto in Aquarius. That's very much about you being in control, wanting to be in control. You're the one who is perhaps making the transformations, trying to make the transformations, and then you have to consider other people. Where do they figure? And if you are too focused on yourself and your own power, and trying to maintain your own power, then I suppose relationships can be compromised. No one wants a power struggle. And it may be that your own stubbornness, which just comes from nowhere on Sunday, does create issues. And you've got Pluto in Aquarius, a fixed sign. We've got Moon in Leo, a fixed sign. And the Moon is applying to a conjunction of Mercury in a fixed sign. So there's some danger on Sunday, Aquarius, that there could be a bit of a deadlock, that you and other people are just not on the same wavelength. But I do think it's unnecessary. And, the Moon, it makes a conjunction to Mercury, but it also makes a sextile to Jupiter. And, that sextile to Jupiter may be the answer. There's a deadlock because perhaps, unlike Saturday, Saturday there was a sense of cooperation, perhaps, people having a common goal, you and others having a common goal. Sunday, you might sort of lose that sense of shared ambitions. But it may only be temporary. You have to perhaps rediscover something. And maybe it's about you and other people developing the same interest, perhaps a creative interest, with the Moon sextile Jupiter. So once you and someone else and other people, maybe it's someone else, maybe close, could be a close relationship. Once you have the same creative goal, or maybe once you enjoy the same thing, it may be something trivial. It may be that if there are issues, people are disagreeing with each other. Perhaps you and another person just can't agree with one another. Maybe the solution is, I don't know, to watch a film together, the kind of film you both enjoy, or I don't know. So, for example, I don't know, if you're both into Monty Python, watch Monty Python. Just doing something which you both enjoy, even if you are disagreeing with one another, even if there's a lot of tension. Shared enjoyment, shared creativity, a shared sense of fun can solve a lot of problems and can get you over what is essentially a short-term problem. So that is something to consider. But maybe it's not an issue. I'm just looking for a problem that just doesn't exist. Pisces, you really should have a good time on Saturday. Saturday looks pretty good. There are some really nice aspects. We've got the moon's in Cancer on Saturday, and obviously Cancer is a water sign. Pisces is a water sign. The moon makes a trine to Saturn. The moon makes a sextile to Mars. It makes a conjunction to Venus. So Pisces, on Saturday, it does seem that things really are flowing, and you can really enjoy yourself. And I was saying on Friday that I thought that your imagination is on really good form, and I think it really is on good form. And you should give free rein to your imagination. And with the moon making a trine to Saturn on Saturday, this is perhaps a chance to catch your imaginings. So you imagine something. It seems a bit far-fetched, but Saturn allows you to capture it, and perhaps put it on paper, write it down, or maybe turn it into a picture, or turn it into a sculpture, or maybe it's about imagination in terms of what you can do with plants. Whatever it is, you can turn your imagination, what your imaginings, into something real. And you're also helped by the fact that the moon is making a conjunction to Venus in Cancer, and that moon conjunct Venus on Saturday is really nice, and it does allow you to really get on with people. Relationships can be very satisfying, and they can be fun, and If romance is something that's important to you, then I think romance is a real possibility. Of course, it always depends on the circumstances, and I'm a bit wary of romance when it comes to astrology. I know that's supposed to be what astrologers are supposed to do, astrology and love, but I don't know. It's such a difficult one. I mean, the reality is, if people ask an astrologer about their love life, it suggests there's a problem, doesn't it? I mean, if one's love life is going well, one doesn't need to consult an astrologer. That seems to be the case. But if romance is a priority for you on Saturday, then can't deny it. Moon is conjunct Venus in Cancer. Cancer is a sign from a Piscean perspective, which is often connected with romantic activity. It's romance, it's creativity. It's a very nice sign. The fifth house. It's the fifth house from Pisces, connected with love and romance. So all of that looks good, and you're further helped by the fact that Venus is making a semi-square to Jupiter. So Jupiter is your ruler. Venus, the planet of love. It's also the planet of good fortune. Jupiter and Venus together. Jupiter is the greater benefic. Venus is the lesser benefic. They're 45 degrees apart. So that's pretty good, and it's pretty happy. And you can really enjoy yourself. Though Venus square Jupiter, semi-square Jupiter can be a little indulgent. So there could be a bit of overindulgence over the weekend, enjoying yourself too much, maybe spending too much money, having too much of a good thing. And, where there's excess, there's often a price to be paid. So don't go to extremes with that Venus semi-square Jupiter. But still, Jupiter, your ruler, is on the Mercury node midpoint. And again, that reinforces the idea that other people are there for you. It's a time when you can interact with people, when people are going to like you. You can make new friends. Existing friendships can be intensified. So yeah, there's plenty to be optimistic about. Now, as far as Sunday is concerned, the moon does move out of Cancer and it moves into Leo. And with the moon moving into Leo, it's possible that you have to face reality in some way. I mean, I don't want to spoil things, but there just may be a little bit of sorting out to be done with the moon in Leo. You perhaps had your fun when moon was in Cancer, but now that moon is in Leo, you have to sort of face reality, perhaps recognize that certain things in your life need to be sorted out. And if you have overindulged yourself on Saturday, maybe on Sunday you're going to have to be a little more disciplined. But I mean, I don't want to emphasize the point. I think that you can ground yourself on Sunday and just have the quiet satisfaction that you're doing the right thing. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and I now want to consider the weekend from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 38, opposition. And this hexagram does not move. There are no moving lines. And this hexagram does give a different view of the weekend. I mean, I thought that from an astrological perspective, for most of us, it actually looked like quite a good weekend. But 38 is suggesting something rather different. Opposition, this hexagram is about being separate from the rest of the world. Greg Winkup describes it as estrangement. We are estranged from other people, and at the same time we just don't feel that we are really strong enough to act on our own. It's just, the opportunity is just not there. And so, we have to work out how best to deal with the situation. And I think we get some hints about what the issue is really about by looking at the nuclear hexagram. So the nuclear hexagram is the kind of the hexagram is the hexagram in the middle. And so the hexagram in the middle gives us hints about what the underlying issue is. And the nuclear hexagram is hexagram 63, which is this one, after completion. So this isn't the hexagram itself for this weekend. It's just the underlying influence. And with after completion, it just may be a situation where recently we have completed something. The I Ching would say you cross the great water, you've got to the other side of a river, but having got to the other side of a river, it's a kind of a new situation where we don't know the rules, and it just may be a sense that things are actually declining as soon as they're starting. And so there might be a bit of a concern there. And so we're going back to opposition. Perhaps the reason we feel a certain estrangement from what's going on around us is because, yes, the situation has changed. We know that. And it's good that the situation has changed. The situation had to change. But now it's changed. Now what? You get sort of chaos the moment it starts, and opposition is just not having the resources, not finding the support, and those who we might normally rely on, we just don't feel that we get on with them. And so the question is, what do we do? Well, it is locked. So because it's locked, that perhaps indicates that the whole thing just really isn't going anywhere, and maybe it's not even a big deal, because if it's locked, this hexagram is just for the weekend, it may not be of any great substance. But an alternative way of looking at it is saying we actually need to find support. We need to get over the opposition, and there's a good chance that the people who can help us, the people who we should naturally be with, we just don't recognize them. We don't really understand where they are or who they are. It's almost as if they're in disguise. And we perhaps need to pull away the wrappings and find out who our real friends are. And perhaps that is the task we need to focus on this weekend. Some people, we can't get on with them, and they're not going to help. But there are people who can help, and we need to relate to these people, and we need to end this sense of estrangement. And after that, we can have another look at the situation. The situation has changed recently, and if we want to move beyond the other side of a river, we've got to the other side of a river, we've perhaps created a bridgehead, but now what? It's difficult to move beyond that bridgehead because we feel that we're stranger in a strange land, and we feel estranged from everything, and we just need to find the right level of support. But I think that is something we can find. Okay, that's a short I Ching. Sorry it's not more positive, but it's just for the weekend, and because it's locked makes me think that the I Ching is not especially significant. I don't think we need to worry about it too much, but it does give a different view in terms of what's happening this weekend, with the astrology appearing to be so positive. Turning to the UK. So the UK has just had an election, and the Starmer government has now been put in place, and Keir Starmer is now the British Prime Minister. So that will take a bit of getting used to. But then, we've had a lot of prime ministers recently. We had Boris Johnson, then we had Liz Truss, and then we had Rishi Sunak, and now it's Keir Starmer. Now, before I look at Keir Starmer's chart and the chart of the election, I just quickly wanted to say something about Nigel Farage and Rishi Sunak. The reason I'm going to talk about Nigel Farage is simply because so in the UK we have individual elections. The country divided up into these constituencies, so you have to get elected for one constituency. And Nigel Farage has been trying on and off to become a member of Parliament for a long time. I think over 20 years. I think this was his 8th attempt to get into Parliament, and he finally made it. He became member of Parliament for Clacton, which is sort of a declining seaside town, Clacton-on-Sea. Seaside towns in the UK are just, all of them seem to have been in permanent decline. I don't know, since the Second World War almost. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because people don't go on holiday. Now if people want to go on holiday, they go to Spain, or now they go even further afield. They go anywhere. They go to India or Thailand or whatever. They don't go to Clacton-on-Sea. Maybe that's one reason. Maybe, perhaps that's a rather trivial way of looking at decline. So I thought I would start off by looking at Nigel Farage's final election victory. So this is when Nigel Farage finally made it into Parliament. This was the time the seat of Clacton-on-Sea declared. So it was at 3:35 in the morning, and those are the positions of the planets, and I thought I would just compare that to Nigel Farage's chart to see what was happening to him. I don't think anything especially dramatic was going on. So here's Nigel Farage's chart in the middle, and you can see he has Venus at 29:31 Taurus, and broadly speaking, he had Neptune sextile his Venus. I suppose he's had this election campaign with Neptune sextile Venus. I mean, he has perhaps that has given him a good insight into what the British people want and what kind of message to deliver. Although the Reform Party, his party, I think last time I looked was 4 seats. They may get 5 seats in the end. The exit poll said they were going to get 13 seats. So the Reform Party has not done brilliantly. It's not like they've suddenly got a huge representation. It's okay. Some people were saying they'd get 0 seats at the beginning of the campaign. So they've done okay, but they haven't done spectacularly. But he's got a load of votes. I think he got 6 million votes. which gives him a certain mandate, and he has got representation in the House of Commons. He's a member of Parliament himself, so maybe that Neptune sextile his Venus gave him a certain amount of insight there. His North Node is at 5 degrees Cancer, and from a whole sign perspective, his North Node kind of has an 11th house feel to it. I mean, it's technically from Placidus, he's got the North Node in the 10th house, but it's close enough to the 11th to cast to make me think it might be in the 11th. And from a whole sign perspective, he's certainly got his North Node in the 11th. Now, why am I talking about the 11th? Because traditionally, in astrology, the 11th house represents Parliament. Or I suppose if you're in the US, it would represent Congress. It represents the legislature. And so he's got the North Node in the sign of in the house of the legislature. And of course, he spent a long time as being a member of the European Parliament. So he was in the European legislature. And it seems that the moment Britain left the European Union, he was perhaps trying to rediscover his destiny. And so I would have said, with the moon close to his North Node, him becoming elected to Parliament is really part of his destiny. It is the right thing to be happening. He's doing what's right for him. That doesn't say anything about my opinions about him, because each person is an individual, or my opinions about his party, Reform UK. It's right for him. As far as other aspects are concerned, there's Mercury. Mercury, 4 degrees 20 Leo. There's his Mars at 4 degrees 1 Aries. So you could say Mercury trine his Mars was, when he got elected. So that's his chart. I didn't sort of notice anything particularly spectacular. Reminder, he's got Saturn in the 7th house. So he does have, he's in a Saturn return period of his chart. Now, that might seem difficult, him having Saturn in his 7th. Certainly his enemies are strong, and his enemies did whatever they could to undermine him during the campaign. But then I suppose if you're a politician, you've got enemies. But in his Vedic chart, he has Dikbala. He has Saturn in the 7th, and Saturn has directional strength. People who have Dikbala, because in the Vedic chart he's got Leo rising and Saturn in Aquarius. So with Dikbala, people with Dikbala are really hard to beat. They're very strong. And so perhaps his Saturn return, because he has Dikbala, directional strength of his Saturn, makes him a hard person to beat. This time round, he got into Parliament. So anyone trying to get the better of Nigel Farage, they came a cropper. So that's his chart. Then there is the British Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister. Again, I don't want to spend long on him, but Rishi Sunak, he's still leader of the opposition. I think that, what was happening with him losing the election, there are several things to point out. He had Uranus, if we look at Rishi Sunak, he had continual Uranus problems. So that just didn't help. Uranus was just hitting his Sun, hitting his Mercury as he became Prime Minister. So just, I don't know, we'll take a rough chart for the election night here. So there's Uranus at 25 Taurus. There's Mars, had just gone across his Mercury. There's his Uranus, his own. So he had a Uranus opposition Uranus opposition Uranus, so it was a kind of early midlife crisis, because he's very young, and he's still in his early 40s, and he's already lost an election. I suppose that's quite an achievement, isn't it? Become prime minister, lost an election, and he's not even 45. He's just turned 44. So Uranus was creating problems. Neptune was also creating problems. There's his Venus at 2950 something Gemini, and with 2950 Gemini, so he had Neptune square his Venus. So Venus is about him perhaps relating to the people at large, and Neptune making mistakes. He was supposed to go to this D-Day celebration, not commemoration, perhaps is a better word, this D-Day commemoration, and he left early, and that was a really serious mistake. I mean, he perhaps didn't really understand what he needed to do. He didn't quite get it. But I think the problem with Sunak is that he had no personal planets in water. He only had Uranus in Scorpio. So if you have got no planets in water signs and you've got Neptune square your Venus, you just might not have a clue what's going on. If he'd had water signs, he could have perhaps, discovered planets in water. He could have perhaps had an emotional understanding of what was appropriate, not leaving D-Day, the D-Day commemoration early. But that really didn't help. But anyway, he's not prime minister anymore, and I suppose we have to think about the future. And I looked at the chart for the supposed Starmer regime, which is when Starmer became prime minister. I've already looked at it, and I thought, well, maybe it would be about 11 o'clock. It wasn't at 11 o'clock. We're looking at the time when he became prime minister. So Starmer became prime minister somewhere between 12 and 12:20. So this is the time, noon, where Starmer arrived at Buckingham Palace, because the king, it's the king who, it's the king who sort of appoints the prime minister. I mean, it's a formality. The king doesn't have a real choice about it, because Starmer has won the election. He's got a majority in the House of Commons, so it's obvious he becomes prime minister. So this is when Starmer arrived at the Buckingham Palace, and this is when when he left at. Sorry, that's the wrong one. That's when he arrived at noon, and he left at 12:20. So if we change that to 12:20, look at the ascendant. He arrived when the ascendant was at 29 degrees 9 Virgo, and he left Buckingham Palace at 12:20, and that's when the ascendant was at 2 degrees 41 Libra. So I think that the ascendant would have taken about 5 minutes from arrival, 29.6 Virgo, to move to Libra. So I think we can say we've got Libra rising. So for the moment, until I get further information, I'm using an approximate mid-time. I'm just saying 10 past 12 as when he became prime minister, when the Starmer government really started. So you can see here you've got 0 degrees 55 Libra. Libra's certainly rising, and you can see superficially that it's quite a good chart, because you've got you've got the moon on the midheaven. I mean, that is a very good time to start this government. I think that short term, I expect things are going to be fine, and the moon is. But unfortunately, the moon is just before new. It's just before the new moon, and I think that is critical. The fact that it's just before the new moon, if it had been just after the full moon, after the new moon, it would have been great. But the problem is that, although the moon is looking good on the midheaven in Cancer, it's going to the new moon and it's combust. The moon perhaps represents the people. He became prime minister on a dying cycle. The moon is deeply waning. And so I think in a longer term, that does suggest problems. But I think short term, you can certainly see the excitement of the event, although there's a couple of things lurking. Look at Neptune. Neptune is quite close to the 7th house cusp. Neptune was exactly on the 7th house cusp as he arrived at Buckingham Palace. But I think that by the time he'd actually become prime minister, the descendant had slipped into Aries. So that's the position that's the position of the planets when he became prime minister. So what does this say about Keir Starmer? So here is Keir Starmer's horoscope. He was born September the 2nd, 1962. We don't know what time he was born. You can see that he's got Libra planets, Mercury, Moon, Venus in Libra. So it's kind of appropriate, perhaps, that the ascendant, as he became prime minister, was in Libra. I mean, moved into Libra. So, I mean, his chart, like Boris, he doesn't really have any planets in fire signs. He's a Virgo. I suppose there's a certain seriousness there. He's got Jupiter opposition Pluto. Like the 1960, a lot of people in 1962, born in 1962, like me, have Jupiter opposition Pluto. So there's a great sense of the need for self-improvement. And I think it's absolutely sincere that he wants to improve himself and he wants to improve his country. I think he's coming in with good intentions. And looking at what was going on in his chart as he became prime minister. Okay, the ascendant was a bit earlier, but so you can see that the ascendant is moving towards a conjunction of his Mercury, and Saturn has already passed that opposition between his Sun and Pluto. So that happened some time ago. So I don't think there's any immediate Saturn issues here. He's going to have Pluto on his Saturn soon, but not this year. Maybe more about next year. And that, I suppose, is the broad picture. I mean, I don't think there's anything immediately problematic about Starmer's chart, certainly from a perspective of transits. However, from a perspective of secondary directions, and I've already talked about this before, but I'll talk about it again. Here are his solar arc directions for when he became prime minister, and if you compare the solar arc directions with his natal chart, there are two things that are of concern. The first thing to be worried about is the fact that his solar arc directed Saturn, remember you move everything 62, he's about to be 61, 62 degrees. So that solar arc directed Saturn is square his Mars. And that, I think, is a problem. That does represent real frustration. Things just not really happening. It's happening now, and I think it's going to start to happen as soon as he becomes prime minister. It's going to be really difficult for things to really happen And it also could represent the war in Ukraine. I mean, Keir Starmer is very determined to continue with NATO's war against Russia, and so Saturn square Neptune could be about the military, could be about immediate or very bad news from a military point of view in terms of Britain's intervention in Ukraine. So that could be one way in which Saturn square Mars is working, but it just could be about his personal life or something going on that it doesn't look too good. The other thing going on is that, look at Mars. His solar arc directed Mars is at 7:52 Virgo. His Sun is at 9:30 Virgo. So Mars is slowly moving towards a conjunction of his Sun. Okay, he probably won't feel that for a year or two, but in a couple of years, he will feel it. So that is a kind of a note for the future. Now, I'm going to be spending sort of a lot more time looking at what's happening for the Starmer government, but I think the immediate concern, okay, short term, it will probably be fine, but I'm guessing that by next year, things are going to be things will start probably going wrong about next year. And what I think is of concern is Saturn and Neptune. So let's look at the solar return for the Starmer regime. Okay, well let's look at the 1210 chart. Okay, there's a chart for just as he was taking power, he was somewhere in Buckingham Palace there. Maybe he became Prime Minister at about 1210. So let's just do a solar return for 1225. It's not that the solar return itself is important. Just want to get an idea of where the planets are going to be in a year's time. And so we'll do it for next year. So in a year's time, where are the planets going to be? So that's actually going to be the solar return. Now let's take this chart and then compare it with the chart of when he takes power. Okay. So what I'm really interested in, is Saturn and Neptune. Saturn and Neptune are going to go into Aries next year. So Saturn and Neptune will be on the descendant of the Starmer regime's chart, and over they will be squaring the midheaven. So this midheaven at around 1 degrees Cancer and the descendant at 0 degrees 55 Aries are going to be hit by. You're going to have Saturn there. Saturn's going to be hitting it. Neptune's going to be hitting it. So suddenly the enemies of the new Labour government will start coming out of the woodwork. Again, this might be to do with what the government is doing in Russia, in Ukraine. I mean, hopefully the war will be over by then. I really hope so. And it'll be more about internal enemies, the opposition, for example. And then the Saturn and Neptune, as soon as they've cleared the descendant, they will move to the square of the Sun and the Moon and move on to the Sun-Moon midpoint. So I think that my immediate thoughts, at least, about Starmer, a Starmer government, I haven't looked at it in great detail, is that probably short term it will be fine, but as we move into 2025, as Saturn and Neptune move into Aries, that is when the problems are going to start. And finally, I want to just consider the horoscope of one candidate to take over from Rishi Sunak. She is apparently the favourite. There are others, and I will be looking at others in another video. But the current favourite, don't have a time of birth for her, is Kemi Badenoch, and she has certain advantages astrologically. She is, I really like the fact that she has got her sun at 11 Capricorn. That sun at 11 Capricorn is very close to the UK's sun. So, if I take if we take the December the 25th 1066 chart, Christmas Day 1066, England's chart, there you can see that England has its, on Christmas Day 1066, when William the Conqueror was crowned king, the sun was at 9:55 Capricorn, and the midheaven was at 9:42 Capricorn. And if you compare England's chart with Kemi Badenoch's chart, it actually looks pretty good. So you can see that her sun is pretty close to England, to the UK's sun, and she's got a load of planets in Virgo. She's got Mars, Jupiter conjunction in Virgo. She's got Saturn in Virgo. So the UK has its North Node on Virgo. So she's got Virgo planets, which help sort of trigger the North Node there. So I think that is pretty useful. Although it should be pointed out that Keir Starmer is a Virgo, and so to begin with, probably he'll get things right. You know, Britain needs Virgo, North Node Virgo, and so if Starmer can just remember that the importance of Virgo, we don't want any crazy stuff. We want Virgo, we want stability, and I suppose as long as he can provide that, I suppose Starmer will be fine. But I do think that by next year, with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, I think that things could start getting difficult for Starmer. And as I pointed out, the Starmer government chart doesn't really chime very well with the UK chart. I mean, especially the fact that Saturn is on the Starmer government. Saturn is on the UK's or England's South Node. That doesn't look great. But as far as Kemi Badenoch is concerned, she's one candidate. I think that it could work for her. I think we don't know. The problem is we don't know her time of birth, and that is a problem. But Kemi Badenoch does. She was actually born on a full moon, and again, we don't know her time of birth. Her moon could be anywhere, but if she was born at noon, that full moon would be potentially across the UK's midheaven, and her moon might be on UK's IC, so perhaps providing security to the country. I don't know. I will have to look at it in further detail. So that's all I'm going to say on the UK. I've been a bit vague, but the information has just been coming in. I haven't really had a chance to really structure what I was going to say, but I will be having more videos on UK politics as soon as possible. So anyway, that's it. I hope you found that video of some interest. If you did find it interesting, I'd be really grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.